Well, good afternoon, and thank you for being here to learn more about our important rail safety legislation today. I want to thank the entire Ohio delegation. As you can see behind me, this is both bipartisan and unanimous. We've got a great showing from our Ohio delegation, and as some of you may know, this is all timely. We had yet another train derailment this morning in Minnesota with a village, a community that had to be evacuated. So what we're talking about here today is very, very important. On February 3rd, the small village of East Palestine, Ohio, changed forever when a train carrying hazardous materials derailed, causing a plume of toxic chemicals to be released into the air and piles of toxic waste to accumulate near and at the crash site. Residents immediately feared for their health and questioned the safety of the air, the water, and the soil that surrounded them. After seeing how life in East Palestine changed for the people of that small Appalachian village, I saw a need to take action to improve the way our nation's freight rail systems operate. Americans from every corner of the nation are understandably concerned about the safety and the accountability of our nation's rail systems. Safety is crucial, and there are several steps Congress can take right now to keep our communities safe and better prevent a disaster like this from ever occurring in another community. The Rail Act makes important and pragmatic changes to the way our nation's rail industry operates, ensuring that our families, friends, and neighbors are kept safe. Our legislation directs the Federal Rail Administrator, in conjunction with the findings of the NTSB's investigation of the train derailment, to recommend new safety requirements and procedures for all trains carrying hazardous materials. It's important that we get all the facts and information from the NTSB's investigation. But the Rail Act requires the recommendations from the Federal Rail Administrator and NTSB to look at everything from train length and weight to route analysis to speed restrictions and track maintenance. Most importantly, it also pushes more funds to first responders, paid for entirely, by the way, by the railroads. The first responders on the scene in East Palestine did a tremendous job identifying and containing the fire, coordinating evacuations, and managing the crash site. Our legislation increases training and funding for our nation's first responders, ensuring communities across the nation are kept as safe as possible in the event of another derailment disaster, without spending a dime of taxpayer dollars. Finally, our legislation holds the rail industry accountable. East Palestine, like many other towns and villages across Ohio and the United States, is in close proximity to an active and busy rail line. While trains carry many of the raw materials and goods that make modern life possible, locomotive derailments and accidents are far too common, putting our communities at risk. The Rail Act increases penalties and fines for rail safety violations. Ohio has one of the country's largest railroad networks and ranks 4th in the nation for serious train accidents and hazardous material spills. From 2019 through November 2022, 281 train accidents occurred within our state. It's time to improve our nation's rail safety standards. I want to say thank you to Representative Amelia Sykes and the members of the Ohio delegation, all of them standing here today, for standing with me and co-sponsoring this legislation. Ohioans are resilient and strong, and we always lend a hand to our fellow neighbors in need. We cannot stand by and risk another community being impacted by a devastating train derailment. I encourage Congress to come together, just like our delegation has today, and work together to pass this important legislation. With that, I'd like to welcome my colleague, Representative Amelia Sykes, to say a few words.
Good afternoon. And thank you to Congressman Johnson and to the entire Ohio delegation who is here with us today for stepping up and leading in this issue. Hopefully we can be a leader for all of Congress of what can be done if you work together and in a bipartisan way. As you can see from the people standing on the stage who represent districts from Southwest Ohio to Northeast Ohio and everywhere in between, public safety transcends politics and district boundaries. And rail safety is not a partisan issue, it is a human issue. When the train derailment in East Palestine occurred just 50 miles from Ohio's 13th Congressional District, where I am proud to represent my hometown, I knew as the only Ohioan on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, I had to do something to make railways safer and to prevent another disastrous train derailment from completely upending another community. That's why I was proud to co-lead the Rail Act with my congressional neighbor, Congressman Bill Johnson, from just about 40 miles to the east of me. The Rail Act is a bipartisan common sense legislation that will implement effective measures to protect our communities, increase accountability for railroad corporations, and ensure no American has to worry about the threat of a toxic derailment in their backyard. Today, Ohio has 43 railroads and 5,139 miles of rail track, the fourth most in the United States. Unfortunately, Ohio ranks third in the nation for serious train accidents and hazardous material spills. I personally live just a few hundred feet from rail tracks in Akron. And it's just a few hundred feet on one side and probably a couple hundred yards on the other. So I am sandwiched in between two railroad tracks operated by two separate railroads. And every time a freight train passes by my home, I know exactly how long or how heavy that load is by how hard my walls shake in my home. The sound of a train whistle has become second nature to me, and I know even what time of the day to expect a train to go through my neighborhood. What I want people to do, and what I think we all want folks to do, is stop thinking about the trains, because so many of us are concerned about a derailment in our backyards, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, in the middle of our downtown areas, in our rural areas where we depend on our agriculture, and we simply just want to go back to not thinking about the trains again. With almost 140,000 miles of freight rail tracks covering 49 out of 50 states, there are millions of Americans who are just like me, whose communities are centered around rail. The Rail Act would implement several common sense measures to improve rail safety, including requiring railroad corporations to provide notification in advance to pertinent state emergency response commissioners, something our Governor Mike DeWine wanted to see. It strengthens requirements pertaining to safety placards that have assisted emergency responders in identifying hazardous materials, requires that large railroads install hot box detectors at a 10-mile intervals, and strengthening regulations to prevent wheel-bearing failures. This legislation will give Americans the peace of mind that trains transporting hazardous materials or any other goods through their neighborhood is happening safely. The Rail Act will also hold rail corporations like Norfolk Southern accountable. And I think it's worth saying it again, it is holding rail corporations accountable. For far too long, rail corporations have put profits over people, endangering our communities and our environment in the process. And enough is simply enough. With the Rail Act, we are holding bad actors accountable by increasing inspections on all trains, auditing federal rail inspection programs, and increasing maximum penalties for violations of rail safety. We crafted this common sense bipartisan legislation with feedback from East Palestine residents, transportation experts, labor leaders, environmental leaders, state and local officials, and including our own Governor Mike DeWine. But the Rail Act is only the start. There's still more work to be done to address this glaring issue of rail safety, and I will not stop prioritizing the 134,314 freight railroad workers across the country, including the over 5,000 workers employed in the state of Ohio. They deserve safe working conditions. They told us and they acknowledged the concerns, and we owe it to them to acknowledge them, and I will continue to fight to put their needs first. Over the past few weeks, Congress have heard from residents from East Palestine in multiple hearings. It's very clear. Americans want safety and accountability. We cannot wait until another tragic, catastrophic derailment upends a community. We must act now. We must pass the RAIL Act. Thank you for joining us, and I'm going to introduce Representative Dave Joyce from Ohio's 14th Congressional District.
Thank you. Train derailments have continued to impact communities in Ohio, as we saw the devastating derailment in East Palestine. We've also experienced the safety issues in my district, Ohio 14. Nearly 2 years ago, a derailment occurred in Ravenna, Ohio, and impacted a community that's still dealing with all the damages from that accident. That's why I'm proud to stand here with all my colleagues, both Democrat and Republicans, to introduce the RAIL Act, which will help improve American railway safety for Ohioans and all Americans. This legislation will help improve safety on our railways, improve our train inspection systems, and increase penalties for violating rail safety regulations. It also helps support training for local emergency response should an incident occur like this again in the future. There's no one town that's ever equipped for this type of disaster. I'm committed to working with my colleagues in Congress in both the House and the Senate to get the needed reforms across the finish line and to the President's desk that will have a real impact in Ohio and in communities across the country. I thank Bill Johnson and Amelia Sykes for leading on this legislation and encourage support on the RAIL Act from my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. Thank you, and I'd like to turn it over to my friend Marcy Kaptur.
Thank you very much, Congressman Joyce and Congressman Johnson and Sykes. Thank you both so much for leading this effort on behalf of our OHIO delegation. Don't they look good for the country? I'm just glad to serve with them. I'm here today because of the toxic chemical exposure of our fellow citizens in Ohio and those who came from Pennsylvania and other locales to help them remediate the situation. Some of the things that I have found out that trouble me greatly are that some of those who came had no hazmat uniforms on. They waded into that situation just to help their colleagues, but that in most rural communities across our country there is no protocol for safety. In urban communities that I represent, our firefighters and so forth have a very specific protocol that they follow. My sense was, and hearings will affirm this, that there was no such situation that occurred in East Palestine, and those who rose to the to help their fellow citizens endangered their own lives. We know that the toxic labeling on the cars had blown off. We learned that through the National Transportation Safety Board. And one nagging issue for me with some of my interests in manufacturing are for the bearing that was to have failed. It was not the first time that that particular item had failed. And was it made in Ohio? Was it made? Where was it made? What was the quality of the steel? What was the quality of the engineering? And what can we do to make sure that that never happens again? I represent a region that stretches from the Indiana border all the way across northern Ohio, then through Congresswoman Brown's district, and then Congressman Joyce. So we are on the main line that stretches from Chicago to Pittsburgh, and that's why we have so many cars, so many train cars, and also Amtrak uses those lines. It has been problematic for my entire career, which is lengthy in this Congress. And one of the bright lights for us is that we passed an infrastructure bill, and this region of America now has an opportunity for the first time in modern history to get Amtrak off the freight lines and to modernize this region and to make sure it's the safest in America, not one of the most dangerous. One of our problems is Norfolk Southern and CSX, to be quite frank, have not been willing to sit down with us to talk about that future. What does it take to get them around a table to help them do a better job? Now, I have a photo that I brought here. The East Palestine situation has gotten a lot of publicity. But in Sandusky, Ohio, last October 22nd, in my district, we had a derailment that didn't get any press. And what happened there was nearly 24 cars went over the overpass on the main artery into Sandusky, Ohio, where Cedar Fair exists. They get millions of visitors a year. And that particular artery has been blocked. Until East Palestine happened, the company didn't even send in anybody to try to help the local mayor and to help create a space where people could pass under that bridge. When that happened, they sort of came in and they kind of cleaned up some of the paraffin that had fallen over in the tanker cars. The tanker cars literally have been hanging over the overpass for all these months. So the mayor, I don't want to quote him directly here, but he did say, you're allowed to say, the cooperation from Norfolk Southern has been incredibly slow, and their willingness to accept responsibility for the cost of the repairs has been vague, all right? And they proceeded with repairs without a commitment of funding from the railroad. How about that? Isn't that a company you'd like to do business with? So we're talking about the main artery between Chicago and Pittsburgh. So I'm so pleased to be a part of a group that cares very much about rail safety and about rail modernization. And I wanted to also say that along with Amelia, when I get home, I wait for the whistles of the train. They're about 1.5 miles away, but I sort of know I'm really home, and you can hear that happen, and you can feel the rumble even a couple miles away from the track. I'm very proud of our rail workers. I am very interested in a 2-person safety crew on our trains, and we need to do so much a better job of the electronic surveillance that can happen to avoid these accidents. One of the reasons this happened is because when the temperature was going up on the bearing, it was reported, an alarm's supposed to go off, but it was reported to an Atlanta switching station and an internet switching station, and somehow, and we'll find out when hearings are held, exactly why that delay didn't get to the engineer in order to prevent this terrible occurrence. So I just thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be with you all today. I now want to introduce one of our newer, very gung-ho, effective members, Representative Mike Carey.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to personally thank Congressman Bill Johnson and Congresswoman Seitz for their leadership. The one thing I will tell you is that I know many of you are from the Ohio media, but I think the national media should be able to just look at this group, this bipartisan group that has come together to solve this very important issue. We all know that rail transportation is critical to our supply chain. And whether it's the natural resources that we depend upon, our goods, services that are supplied through the rails, or our agricultural products. But we cannot have rail reliability without first rail safety. So again, that's why I'm so pleased to be with this group. It wasn't but maybe 7 to 10 days after what happened in your district of East Palestine, which, by the way, is about 10 miles from where my wife's family is from, that I got word that we had another derailment in Clark County. Now, it was a few miles outside my district, but it was something that Congressman Turner and I worked very closely on and went to the site the next day. I think because of what we saw in East Palestine, they were able to open up that road right away. And they worked with the community to get that done. While there is more work that we can do, I am glad that the industry has announced changes to their operations since these derailments. But along with those changes, we hope that this bill will help to prevent further disasters from happening and to hold railroad companies accountable, not only to stricter safety regulations, but to the producers and the customers who rely so heavily upon them to move our goods. I want to thank you again for being here, and I want to also, again, please look at this bipartisan group. This is what good government is all about. So with that, I'm going to announce my dear friend who listens to the same train whistle that I do because we only live about a mile apart, Representative Joyce Beatty.
Thank you so much, Mike. Good afternoon, and thank you. I represent Columbus's 3rd Congressional District, and I sit in the capital of this great state of Ohio. Let me start today by sharing my sincere condolences to the community in Minnesota and also East Palestine. Those lives and livelihoods have been unpinned by another, what we believe, preventable disaster that has unfortunately become too commonplace in our country and now in the state of Ohio. I'm proud to say that the Congressional delegation from Ohio has come together, a bipartisan way to address this issue. Certainly, it gives me great pleasure to stand here with Congressman Bill Johnson and Congresswoman Amelia Sykes. Let me just say thank you for your leadership, for stepping up, but also for bringing us together. Also, we're very fortunate that our Senate delegation has also introduced a bipartisan piece of legislation. And I am proud to say I stand with those in the House and those in the Senate. The time for action is now. And that's what we want you to report, that we are taking action now. Because no community in my district, in Ohio, or across this nation should have to fear their health and safety, their neighborhood to become the next site of a train derailment. And we know 2 to 3 happen on an average every day, including the derailment that just occurred in Minnesota. Again, that is why I am proud to stand here today and call on Congress to take up this piece of legislation, the Rail Act. Our legislation, the Rail Act, holds companies like Norfolk Southern accountable and take the necessary steps to protect the safety of our citizens. Thank you again, Congressman Bill Johnson. Thank you again, Congresswoman Amelia Sykes. And I now have the pleasure to introduce another new member, Representative Max Miller. There you are, right behind me. Thank you.
Thank you. I think a lot of you are hearing a common theme, which is bipartisanship. And I'm proud and honored to stand on this stage today with both Republicans and Democrats who are supporting an amazing bill that is going to directly change the East Palestine residents' lives. And thank you. It's my honor to be here today with my colleagues from across Ohio in supporting of the Reducing Accidents and Locomotives Act. I thank Representative Johnson for his leadership and Representative Sykes for leading this important bipartisan bill. The Rail Act takes key steps to improve rail safety so that what had happened in East Palestine, Ohio, doesn't happen again. Our bill does this by using safety data to guide our decisions by supporting hazardous materials, training for first responders, increasing penalties for rail safety violations, increasing train inspections, and auditing federal rail inspection programs. Soon after the derailment, I told Representative Johnson that I would be with him every step of the way as we would work to make this right for the people of East Palestine. And it's not just me, once again, who's standing up here. It's the majority of our delegation standing by Representative Johnson and Representative Sykes. Support for this bill from Republicans and Democrats alike is extremely encouraging and shows our shared commitment from across the political spectrum to put our words into action. We can pass this bill, and we can get it to the President. I'm confident that together, we will deliver for the people of Ohio and always monitor the ongoing situations and be there at every step of the way. Thank you, and God bless you all. It is now my honor to introduce my neighbor, district neighbor, Ms. Chantel Brana, the 11th District of Ohio.
Thank you, and good afternoon. First and foremost, let me emphasize that nothing is more important than ensuring health and welfare of our community. Protecting our communities means safeguarding our railways and rail workers in Ohio, home to one of the nation's largest railroad networks. From 2019 to 2022, there were 281 rail accidents in Ohio alone, the fourth highest rate in the country. And just 3 weeks ago, in Cleveland, a rail conductor tragically lost his life due to a rail collision. It's not just collisions that pose a threat to our communities. Last month in East Palestine, Ohio, we witnessed the far-reaching impact of derailments involving hazardous materials. Community leaders in my district have raised concerns about the volume of hazardous freight moving through Cuyahoga County for years. It is time we listen to our community leaders and deliver meaningful change. That is why I'm proud to join the Ohio Democratic House delegation in co-sponsoring the Rail Act, which will ensure the railroad corporations are held fully accountable and strengthen inspection protocols, particularly for transportation of hazardous materials. This bipartisan legislation will also help ensure that every community can live free from fear of environmental dangers caused by toxic derailments. The fight to protect our communities in Northeast Ohio and across the country from train accidents will not stop here. We will continue to advocate for policies that safeguard our rail workers and hold those at fault accountable. And once again, I want to thank Representative Sykes and Representative Johnson for initiating this press conference and bringing us together. And with that, I have the pleasure of introducing my friend, Mr. Greg Lansman.
Thank you. Representative Carey said this is what good government looks like, and I couldn't agree more. You know, there's this huge issue, arguably a crisis with these derailments, and you have not just this bipartisan group that Congressman Johnson and Congresswoman Amelia Sykes have pulled together, but the reform itself is very smart. It is based on best practices. It's based on what we know to be true and what we know needs to be fixed, and it gets to a very critical issue, which is the safety of our children and our families, which every single child, every single family deserves. These derailments will continue until we do something about it, until we pass these reforms. It is absolutely time for 21st century rail safety regulations. We need Congress, all of us, to pass this bipartisan package that ensures safety from the wheel bearings to the brakes, from detectors to placards, from more frequent and comprehensive inspections to clearer communications with communities. And we must do this for the folks in East Palestine, Cincinnati, and every community across this great country of ours. We can get it done, and Ohio has led the way on so many things. And because of Mr. Johnson and because of Ms. Sykes, we are leading the way again. Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Okay, we'll take a few questions. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. How do you feel that the Biden administration has handled what's been going on? What do you want to see from them? And where are your expectations on what they can do and working with you guys on?
Well, look, I'm certainly pleased with the attention of the EPA Administrator Regan, and I know initially when the governor requested support from the administration, FEMA support was denied. We went back and questioned that. FEMA did eventually come out, as did CDC, as did help from HHS in setting up a health clinic. So I think from an agency perspective, underneath the White House, things have gone well. The people of East Palestine would certainly still like to hear from the president. Maybe that'll happen at some point. But from an agency perspective, I think from federal, state, and local, I think the response has been good, and a lot of progress has been made. Still a long way to go. I mean, the water and the air monitoring is going to continue. A lot of hard work left to do to get the toxic material out of the community, and that's what we're focused on right now.
May I add something?
Sure.
Thank you. And I would just like to say to add upon that question, we have seen a significant cooperation between our state, local, and federal governments, and Congressman Johnson's leadership has helped shepherd that. I have been in communication with President Biden, and he continues to monitor this issue. He is very concerned about the people of East Palestine as well as across the state of Ohio, including Beaver County in Pennsylvania. And we are working closely with the administration to ensure that they are fulfilling all of the promises that they've made to folks in East Palestine, to Congressman Johnson, and all of us who remain concerned about the livelihood and the health and well-being of those in the community.
Thank you, Emil. Yes.
Thanks, Congressman. Obviously, there's a big showing for this bill. On the Senate side, Senators Brown and Vance have their legislation that President Biden has already endorsed. I noticed that Congressman DeLuzio and Lalata from Pennsylvania and New York introduced a direct companion bill to the Vance-Brown legislation. Have you talked with them about why they felt that was necessary and about merging these two pieces of legislation?
No, quite honestly, I haven't, because there are a few things in the Vance Brown bill that simply we wanted to make sure we got something that could get done. And I applaud what Senator Vance and Senator Brown have done, and they've brought focus to it. And if it gets through the Senate, that'll be great. If Majority Leader Schumer brings it up, then we'll conference and we'll merge the two together, and we'll come out with an even better product. But there's a couple of things in that bill in the Senate that just simply wouldn't get through the House. We have House rules here about appropriations, and so there are appropriation issues that would prevent it from getting to the House. There are provisions that required, for example, that all of the chemical tank cars, like the ones that were carrying the vinyl chloride, be replaced by 2025. Physically impossible to do. Because we only have one provider in the United States that make those kinds of cars, and with the backlog and the capacity of manufacturing those cars, it just wasn't possible. So we had to tweak it some to get it through the House, and I'm optimistic that at the end of the day, once the Senate moves on theirs, once we move on the one here in the House, the Rail Act, I think we'll come out with a good product. Yes, ma'am. Well, certainly we've got some work to do to get across our conference. I have been in discussions with Chairman Graves and with Chairman Nels that has the subcommittee, as well as Vice Chairman Brandon Williams on that subcommittee that handles rail safety. And so we are in direct conversations with them. I initially came out, and I agree, and I even said so in my statement, we've got to get all the facts from the NTSB. This is just a starting point. What we're starting with today are very pragmatic changes based on what we know today. And I'm hopeful that as we do our job in educating and informing our conference, I think you're going to see a lot more interest in Congress making a statement now that rail safety is important. I mean, you heard earlier, 3 derailments per day on the average. That's way too many. Another one this morning in Minnesota. When is the next one going to occur, and what is the next village or township or community in America that's going to have to be evacuated because of unsafe rail? So I think we're on a positive slide with this. Yes, ma'am.
There have been some questions about whether the NTSB report could take as much as a year on the East Palestine incident. I was curious if you think you could pass this legislation while that report is still working, and if you have gotten commitments from any House leadership to move it forward to a markup or to the floor.
Well, again, I'll refer you to my answer on the previous question. We're very optimistic that we've got something that makes sense. It's pragmatic. I think we've got a good shot at getting something both in the House and the Senate that we can marry together that will address near-term solutions to very low-hanging fruit kinds of issues. Things that we already know from the preliminary report from NTSB. I can't speak to how long NTSB is going to take. That's something that we'll have to talk with the Transportation Secretary about. But you know, we're going to keep pressing to address rail safety now, because who knows when the next derailment is going to occur. Hopefully it won't, but we know based on statistics that it's likely.
Can I jump in here too?
Sure.
Thank you. And thank you for that question as well. I know that the members of our Democratic delegation are incredibly encouraged. Do hope to see this. Our leadership is encouraged and working with us to make sure we are responding to the needs of the folks in East Palestine and throughout the country who are very concerned. As the Congressman mentioned before, the bill does have some differences in the Senate, and we made those decisions so that we could get the conversations going. And so we're holding them at their word that we can get some conversations started to get a meaningful piece of legislation passed to create that peace of mind that people deserve. So they stop thinking about train derailments. Unfortunately, folks are asking me in my very urban neighborhoods of what's going on with the trains. Can you fix something with the trains? We're having these different issues. Can you help them? Help us hold Norfolk Southern accountable and other railroad companies. We are dedicated to it. Our caucus and our leadership is dedicated to it, and we're hoping that the majority is willing to start hearings on this even before the NTSB report, which may take 12 to 18 months, because there's a lot that we can do. We've heard from Chair Hamady, who has made it very clear this was 100% preventable. And if we know if something is predictable, it is preventable, and she's made that very clear, and we owe it to everyone who is concerned about this to get this bill moving. And that's why you see this strong showing here today, and we're encouraging all of our colleagues to have the same sense of urgency that we have.
Yeah, I think what Amelia just said begs to be highlighted again. Most accidents can be prevented if you do your preparation work up front. And this is certainly a case where we can prevent these kind of train derailments and the impacts to communities across the country. Yes, sir.
Norfolk Southern has launched voluntary safety upgrades, and industry has kind of defended their safety record. Why does Congress need to act in this kind of given that?
Well, because it's Congress's responsibility. We are responsible for rail safety. We have an oversight responsibility, not only with the Department of Transportation, but over the industries that run on those rails. So we can't just sit on the sidelines and be speechless on this. This is part of what Congress's responsibility is. No other questions? Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
And great answers.
It was so strategic to do that.
I just wanted to ask you a question about your straight. Can you back on your letter that you wrote?
Thanks, Chantel.